iRacing has just split their license system between sports cars and open wheeler cars this series. It's a big change to how the game works and what cars you need to drive. And at the moment, there's a lot of drivers coming in from like the F1 games for the first time and wanting to know, how do I fight my way to the A-class license level and race the F1 car? If you do want to get to A-class and open wheelers, there are a lot of cars that you will need to drive to get there. So today I'll be going through all the open wheel race cars that are currently raced in iRacing, and I'll be letting you know which ones are actually raced and are popular so you can save your money, as well as giving you as many tips as possible for each formula car up the ladder. Let's get into it. So through the license system on iRacing, you will need to drive a different car pretty much for each license grade. In each license grade, you do need to do 4 races in it, and you need to maintain a good enough safety rating to get promoted to the next license grade. It basically means like don't crash into other people or drive through the dirt and stuff like that. So I'll be starting with the rookie cars in iRacing, and then we'll go through each one all the way as I get faster and faster to my favorite open wheel cars in iRacing, and then the Class A cars. So for starters, in rookies, you've got a choice of 2 open wheelers. The first one is the Formula V. This is a Volkswagen 1200 engined Volkswagen front end, little tiny little race car. It's got very low power and very soft suspension. And from what I've seen, a lot of new drivers in this car really struggle with oversteer on lifting off the throttle. So going into a corner, you're braking, you're downshifting, and the thing just wants to rotate on you. I've found that the best fix to this is just more throttle. I know that kind of sounds lame, but just like stay on the throttle as much as possible. When you're off the throttle, the thing wants to rotate, but it's got such little power that you can stay on the throttle a lot of the time. Most of the time in this car, you'll be using 3rd or 4th gear, and you'll be using the clutch to change gears. Often you can hold your foot flat on the throttle, pull the next gear, and then just like punch the clutch to shift it up a gear. You can also just like lift the throttle off and it'll go into the next gear as well. There is rookie racing in this car, so it's at rookie tracks. It's every hour, so there's races all the time, and it's okay if you're slow in this car. It's draft racing, so even if you're like a second off the pace in this car, you can still stay in the draft and win races. This is a fun car to drive. My boyfriend's actually a driving coach for this for VRS, and he loves driving it. I've got to drive it a little bit in real life myself as well, so it's a good car to learn to iRace on. The next car is the Formula Ford 1600, and this is raced all over the world. It drives pretty much the same as the Formula V, but with actual good suspension and a bit more grunt. This car is still quite loose though, but you can sometimes get wheel spin sometimes, but it's still pretty rare. I find this car like actually feels really comfortable sliding around, so don't be scared to feel it kind of move underneath you and kind of like fight it out to the exits of each corners. I think that's pretty normal. In terms of popularity, I was looking at the splits for this. So this gets maybe 1.5 times the splits as the Formula V. The Formula V and this car both have like huge amounts of people racing it, so you're always going to find people to race against, but this is slightly more popular than the Formula V. It's rookie racing every hour in this car at rookie tracks, and it is the opposite of Formula V, and I've noticed that both races are 12-minute races, so you can technically join one server, do practice, qualify, and do a race, and then technically join Formula V every like half hour. So you can race like constantly on iRacing. I think that's pretty crazy. You probably shouldn't do that, but if you want to, you can. There's also a Class D Open series for this car, and at the moment it basically like always rains in this series. I love it. I've been racing it a lot, and my tip for this car is kind of starting the car and changing gears as best as possible. I have a paddle clutch set up on my Logitech G kind of direct drive wheel, and when starting the clutch, I set the paddle clutch at 50% in the software and another clutch at 100%. And then when I launch, I'm in first gear, I just release the 100% clutch and it goes to 50%. And then I basically ride that for a little bit and then release that. And that's how I get it off the line. I will talk a little bit about getting these cars off the line. So if you've not done it before, I recommend setting this up in your settings. But you can do this yourself. If you don't have a paddle clutch, you can go into the settings of iRacing and you can bind another button for the clutch, like a third clutch or a second clutch button. You can put it on your wheel maybe, and when you want to start the car, you want to hold your foot on 50% of the throttle and then press the button, then pull first gear, and then when the lights go out, you just release the button and then drive the car like normally. That's how it works. My final thing about this car is it also has no tire wear. So some people are like, oh, maybe I'm gonna burn through the tires. No, you're not. Just like, it takes like a lap to come up to temp, but after it's up to temp, just send it. Cool, so out of rookies, we go to the Class D cars. The first car is the Skip Barber. This is the OG iRacing car. It's been in iRacing forever, has been updated a bunch of times, and it drives kind of like the Formula V, but with a tiny bit more grip and a bunch more power as well. This car used to be super popular, and I used to race a lot of it, but now it isn't really as popular. There are still splits sometimes going with over 20 drivers, so you will find people to race against in this car, but it's not as reliable as it once was. People swear by this car though. I think this is probably the one car in iRacing where some people just live and breathe Skip Barber. They just love this car and just drive it exclusively. It's got a really interesting driving style. It's similar to the V in that you slide it and you get on throttle and it kind of sits down a bit, so it understeers on throttle. It teaches some good techniques, but it's probably not my recommendation for Class D at the moment. The next car is the FIA Formula 4. This is technically an unlabeled or unbranded car. It's just labeled FIA F4. It's kind of a mystery car, and it's super popular. It's raced all the time on iRacing. This car has a weird driving style. It likes a lot of slip angles, so it likes to get really sideways in corner, like not full sideways, but like just a little bit sideways in corners. The closest thing I can describe it is it's the most like R-Factor style handling car in iRacing. This car does have a bit of aero, but it is still basically a draft race in these, and the driving standards are a little bit all over the place in the Formula 4 races. So if you are racing this car, make sure you keep an eye out for cars in front and also in your mirror for cars behind. You want to avoid as many crashes as possible when they start happening, so that's what I recommend. This car also has basically no tire wear, and there are two main series. There's an open setup and a fixed setup series. They alternate each hour, so you can do both once every hour. I recommend getting this car. I think it's fun. I think it is good racing. It also has wet tires as well, I should say, but there's currently no wet racing in this car. But yeah, I recommend it. So once we move to Class C, we get into basically, I'm going to start with the more unpopular cars first. The first up is the Lotus 49 and the 79. These are old cars. They're not raced on iRacing. There is an official series, but there's not enough people signing up for it to get like a regular race happening every day. If you do want to race these cars though, you can. There is a strength of field race that'll be organized each week, and it'll be organized on the forums. So basically everyone will go on there and they'll all agree to race this car at a specific time each week. But day to day, if you want to race this car, it's empty. The Lotus 79 is an insane car. It drives like a modern F1 car. It is like way too much aero in my opinion. My tip for it is to just drive it really, really hard. Like you can drive it way faster than you think you can. It's super fast. And the Lotus 49 is a bit different. It's a standard old car. It'll kind of move around a tiny bit, but they're very different cars, but yeah, kind of fun. The next car in Class C is the Dallara IR01. iRacing keeps trying to make this car happen. It's not going to happen. This is a real life car made by Dallara. Well, it's designed by Dallara. It doesn't actually exist in real life, but it has been designed by actual designers, which is kind of cool. It's basically like the X2010 or X2019 of iRacing is probably the equivalent. It has a V10 engine and multiple tire compounds, and the World Championship of Open Wheelers use this car as well, so I don't recommend buying this car. It's not used enough to really warrant a purchase, but my fun fact for it is it does randomly do ovals. So if you want to race it on ovals, you can go for it. The next car is the Indy Pro 2000. This is a road to INDYCAR from America. I've never actually raced this car, but it's also like never had enough people in my Australian time zone for an actual race to form. I've had a look at the last 2 weeks actually in terms of races. 90% of splits don't have enough people to have a race. There are a few races with about 10 people in it, and from what I can see, there is a soft race that happens as well. So there are people that do race this car, so if you do really like it, you can find people, but it's not kind of regularly going. For that reason, I don't recommend this car in this category unless you're from USA and you just Froth Road to Indy. Next up is the Dallara F3. This is the 2 generations ago F3 car from Dallara. It was basically when GP3 was first starting alongside F1, so this was raced in the Formula 3 series. The best way to say it would be this is the era of car that Max Verstappen raced Formula 3 in. So if you're looking to emulate him, this is a car that he drove. This car used to be super popular with lots of people racing it, but it's kind of been replaced by the next car that I'll go to in a sec. But I think this car is still raced a little bit, even though not as much. It's actually at Monza this week, which is super popular, and it looks like it's had a few splits for each time slot, so maybe this car is back. It is a wild car to drive. It has way less power than you think it does, and you're braking super late and taking lots of commitment through corners because it's got a fair bit of aero. It stops super quick, and because it's underpowered and stops super quick, it's really important to keep momentum up. If you dab the brakes for slightly too long, you just wipe off way too much speed. So it's all about really kind of like punching the brake and just carrying really high minimum speed through corners. The next car is the Super Formula Light, and this car has basically replaced the Formula 3 car in terms of popularity. It's also made by Dallara and it's raced in Japan, and it's basically the equivalent of today's real world F3 series that's raced, but with slightly different aero and like Kumho tires and a different engine. The engine is actually out of a GR Yaris, which is pretty cool. To race this car, it's very similar to the F3 car. The braking distances are really short, so you just need to be super committed. You're braking really late into corners at like the 50-meter board, and yeah, the time of the brake is really small. Since the cars are really underpowered and they have so much aero, it changes each track, but I raced Hungary recently, and it's wild how that track feels like a really slow speed track in Formula 1, but in this Super Formula Lights car, it feels like a high-speed track. You never go below 3rd gear, and you're just like lifting off the throttle and turning it into corners. It's crazy. It does have more grunt than the old F3 car, so you can sometimes light it up out of corners, but it's still pretty underpowered. Racing-wise, this car is super sketchy on cold tires, I've found, so you need to be careful on the first few corners, especially in a race, but also the first lap or so, and it'll get faster all session as the fuel burns. It's also a draft car, so if you're within like 0.8 of the second or something of the car in front, you'll get the big suck and you'll pass them in a straight line, so be aware of that. There's an open and a fixed series racing this car, and they're on alternating hours. The open series is 30 minutes and the fixed series is a 20-minute race. The fixed setup generally has like no front end, so you're understeering everywhere, and it has more aero than the like best open setups, so it's slower in a straight line. The racing's slightly different between the open and the fixed setup. This car also has wet tires, and at the moment one of the open or fixed series generally features a good chance of it raining in each race, so be ready for it. I think this car's fun to drive in the wet. Some people are scared of it, but don't be scared. My other recommendation for this car is starting it 20% clutch is what I use off the line, so I set my other clutch at 20% and my other one at 100%, and then I release 100% and I just sit on 20% for like a second and I release that. Yeah, Super Formula Light, I really recommend this car. It's raced a lot. It's basically the formula racing car that everyone's getting stuck into at the moment, so if you're gonna pick up anything, I recommend this one. So the next car is in Class B. It's the modern INDYCAR. This car is pretty fun. It has everything you'd expect. It has both tire compounds, it has an aero screen, and it is a really fun car to drive. It has a fair bit of power, so be ready for it to kind of move around on throttle, but I find it most sketchy under brakes. Under brakes with the rear, it often feels like the rear is going to kind of disconnect and you're going to just like swap ends and go backwards into a corner. That's the main thing I'm scared of driving this car. I don't have a fix for it. It feels really weird, and it feels like that's the scary thing on the initial braking hit, and then when you get closer to the apex, it starts to like lock fronts and stuff like that. That's my least favorite part of this car, and I think if you are going to race this car, that's the thing you need to be aware of, is braking and getting it into a corner is quite difficult. This car is raced a lot in iRacing. There's an open and a fixed series that races on both ovals and road courses, and there's also a fixed oval only series that is also really popular. So if you're into oval racing, that's a good series to race. There's also the iRacing INDYCAR series, which is races that match the real world INDYCAR series schedule, and the series goes for the entire year. There's a lot of like off weeks, but then races to kind of match the real world races. This car is great. It's great to race on ovals, and I definitely recommend getting it, especially because you can race in the upcoming Indy 500 on iRacing, which is a lot of fun. The next car is the Super Formula. This is released from like a few seasons ago. It's really new on iRacing, but it's basically a Formula 2 level car, and it's fast and it's really, really fun. There is a fixed and an open series on iRacing, and you can race the Honda or the Toyota, but they're also the same as well. This car is really tricky to drive. It is super easy to light the rears up coming out of corners. It is so much power. So the main thing you'll be doing is lots of short shifting and being patient on the throttle. For example, I raced at Matigi recently and I found it like the slowest hairpins. I was still using like third gear to minimize wheel spin. You can also play around with the throttle mapping setting to make it easier to get on throttle without doing a full burnout in the open series. But in the fixed series, you just got to be careful with your right foot. This car is an overtake system, so basically you have the option of using more power in the race. It's a toggle, so you click to turn it on once you've bound a button in your settings in iRacing, and then you click it again to turn it off, and you get 200 seconds for the entire race. But once you turn it off, you need to wait like 140 seconds or something for it to turn back on again. So basically like there's a cooldown after you use it. This kind of sucks as a system, in my opinion. The cooldown's kind of lame, but yeah, it's worth using overtake in a battle if you're racing another car. But keep in mind that the majority of people racing this car will just save their overtake system and then they'll just deploy them for the final lap or two of the race. I also found that the tires get better in this car the longer the race goes. It's also cold and scary on the first lap. But yeah, it's a fun car to drive. I love it. I find it's the best driving workout for myself and my racing brain. It's fast and you don't get time to rest, and it forces you to use like really, really good technique to get time out of it. I find it really rewarding to focus and really watch what my inputs are doing and watch myself get better at driving it. You can break down, you know, your throttle application, your turn-in points, your minimum speed, your trail brake, everything. And I find it a really big challenge, but lots of fun. To start this car, it's really tricky, and you'll often watch half the grid crash on the race starts because they don't know how to start it. So I found a trick to starting it. It's a little weird, but bear with me. Basically, I set my second clutch bite point to 43%, and then I use half throttle off the line. So I use my second clutch and I hold half throttle, and then when the lights go out, I release my second clutch. So I'm on 43% clutch and 50% throttle. And after about a second or so, once I'm at like 60 kilometers an hour or something, I actually shift to second gear, and then only once I'm in second gear, I then release the clutch and then I throttle up. It's really tricky. It happens like in the space of like 2 seconds or something, but I found that I got really awesome starts with it. One start I like rocketed away and like gapped everyone before the first corner. So that's what I recommend. The final car we have is in Class A, and it's the 2022 Mercedes F1 car. In real life, this car was quite average, and it follows the iRacing trend of scanning F1 cars that turn out to not be very good, just like the Williams Toyota and the McLaren before it. I think this car is fun, and if you want to race F1 cars on iRacing, this is the place to be. There's a fixed and an open series that is raced, and there's also the iRacing Grand Prix Tour, which is a series like the INDYCAR iRacing series that follows the real world schedule. It's pretty popular, so there is some good racing in that series, and I like the schedule. If the track raced in real world isn't in iRacing will pick like a similar inspired circuit for the round. Like for example, last week was at Miami, and in iRacing we were racing at Sebring, which is also in Florida. This car is good though. It has multiple tire compounds, so there's a bit of strategy, and it also has like DRS and all that, and an ERS system, so it's a bit dialed back from real world. You only have a few settings like attack, balanced, no deploy, and qualifying modes. But if you're into that attacking and defending style of racing with hybrids, this car definitely has it. My final tip for this car is often just staying on the track will get you a good result. I've seen so many races with this car that just everyone dies, or like 3 cars finish on the lead lap. So just keep it on the black stuff and you'll have a good result in this car. So that's all the open wheel cars in iRacing. Let us know in the comments if there's one particular that you like, or one that you hate in particular, I'd love to hear about it. And if you found the video informative at all, you can leave a like, and you can also subscribe to Overtake for more sim racing and iRacing videos. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.